All right, good afternoon. I'm Paul Klein, and it's a pleasure to be here. I totally believe that every single artist can be successful. Now, you got to realize that if you take a look at the numbers, that doesn't seem to be the case. And part of the reason is, I think, that artists, and in particular I'm thinking in terms of visual artists, don't necessarily have the wherewithal or the guide or the knowledge or the history, to be able to take on that responsibility. And it isn't all that difficult. Most artists think that they don't necessarily need all that business acumen. If you take a look at it, you can say, I want to be a business person. I don't know there must be people, maybe not in this room, who go to college and go, I want to be a banker. I want to be a teller. That's what I want to do. I want to put on a nice three-piece suit or a nice outfit, and I want to go to work, and I want to be that person. Now, there's a difference between being that kind of a business person and being an artist. If you enter the business world in that kind of a capacity, you have a boss. You have hours. You have to wear appropriate attire. You have rules that you need to follow. Conversely, if you were an artist, you don't have a boss. You probably make your own hours. You make your own decisions and your own choices about the kind of work you're going to do. And you have that kind of responsibility. But, ostensibly it seems like these two different directions are in fact different. I've been in the art world at a gallery for over 30 years. I've worked with TED Fellows and mentoring them. I've done some art consulting, and now I've been teaching this course for 4 years. In my course, it's online, and I bring in guest experts and I interview them. And I like to shuffle it up so it keeps me fresh, so that over the 4 years I've interviewed over 300 different artists, dealers, museum directors, curators, art consultants, lawyers, etc. And there's an awful lot of things that come in common, and with what they say. It isn't so much that there are rules, but there's kind of like there are attitudes. Take a look at this. Every single person in this room is unique. All of us are different from one another. All of us have different things that make us tick. We are unique. Now, the art world, as opposed to the business world, the art world is subjective. It is up to each individual to make a determination as to what they like in art, a ballet, an opera, a piece of music, whatever. Now, if your friends like something, pay attention to that. If your friends like something, you might like it too. Billy likes it, Bobby likes it, Susie, Jane, they like it. Maybe I should pay attention to it. That kind of peer thing kind of works. But it's still an individual kind of a result, subjective individual response. If you take a look at sports, if you look at the Olympics, if somebody does better by 100th of a second, they may win the gold medal. If you make a painting 5 minutes faster than the person to your left, you're not getting a prize for, greater speed. If we asked each person in the room to name their favorite artist, favorite living artist, favorite dead artist, we would probably get, there's 400 people in the room, we'd probably get 300 different answers. And not one of you could argue logically and convincingly that somebody else is wrong. Okay? So it's not like you need to distinguish yourself. Distinguish is a good word. It's not like you need to distinguish yourself as being better. It needs to be, you need to distinguish yourself as being you. You need to be you. That's pretty cool. I think the same kinds of things, though, go back and forth and affect and work in the business world. Those who make the most out of their lives in terms of fulfilling what it is they want to do and discovering what they want to do as they move forward are those who have passion and are engaged, and they have knowledge. All right? So there's only really two things, I think, that are holding artists back. One is knowledge, and two is gumption, just doing it, okay? Now, as young artists, as people who are in college, out of college, in that 20-something kind of a range, it's difficult. And one of the questions that I get asked a lot is graduate school, art school. Do I want to go to graduate school as an artist? And the answer really is maybe. What you need as an artist is something to say. You need to have something you believe in. You need to come from your gut. You need to come from your soul. You need to have conviction. You need to have something to express. And I don't know how much that comes from school, or if it comes from living and having life experiences and being challenged. I spoke to a friend of mine 2 days ago who lived on the East Coast and went to college on the West Coast. And his family didn't have the money to pay for even bus transportation. He would hitchhike and he would hop freight trains to get back and forth from the West Coast to the East Coast. We all know that he got as much of an education hopping a freight as he did in many of his classes. Now, that isn't to say that going to school is a waste of time. It certainly isn't, and you need to be able to know how to affect and act and certain kinds of knowledge. But you also need to have a life, and you need to know, you need to have some vision, and you need to have something you want to express. And that takes time. So you need to make a commitment, but you also need to be able to modify it and take a look at the results. All of us can think of artists whose work we really, really like, and we know that they haven't sold a damn thing in years. And we can look at other artists whose work we find despicable, and we know that they're making money hand over fist. And the question is, why them and not those guys? And it goes back to what I was saying about the numbers and agreement and getting your art out there. If we are all unique, and if everybody's response to art is subjective, that means that there are people in the world who like what you do. Now, you have to find them, okay? Or you need to create them. Both of those things are viable. But you need to find a way to get your art in front of enough people and or the right people so that they want to buy it, or they want to acquire it, or they want to respond to it. I want to be careful here as an aside. I want to see all of you artists succeed, but I don't want to define what success is. I want you to define what success is. For most artists, success in this country means money. It's kind of like as Americans how we keep score. But for a lot of people, it isn't necessarily money. It could be, I want more museum exposure. I want attention. I want to change the world. I want to affect social change. I want to see my politics have a bigger influence on more people. Those are all different ways of measuring success, so that you need to figure out what that success is for you. Okay? So what we've got now, we've boiled it down a little bit, right? You are unique, and people's response to art is subjective. So therefore, what you need to do is to get enough people to respond to what you're doing for you to attain the success that you want. And that's where it gets to be a business. Okay? So in the course, what I teach, we differentiate between vision, the non-negotiable core issues, the content that your art is about, and strategy. For me, strategy is how the hell do you get there? Do I make it bigger? Do I make it smaller? Do I make it more expensive? Do I make it more green? Do I put a frame on it? Do I make it three-dimensional? Should I make it out of bronze or should I make it out of soap? Those are the kinds of things. Some of those may be part of core issues about content for you, but they probably are strategy. At least I hope from that example you can tell which ones are strategy, and which ones are content. You need to realize that there are many, I do these webinars, and I interview my guests, and I was talking about the art world, and this one collector from North Carolina corrected me, and she said, Paul, there's really not an art world. There are lots of art villages. And it makes it much easier to digest and comprehend and appreciate if you start thinking about art villages. Now, an art village could be highfalutin, upper-end art galleries that are selling pictures for $5,000 to much more. Okay? Maybe when we think about the art world, that is what we're thinking about the most. I had a woman in my course whose goal for her to have success, she wanted to have her art in the majority of hotel rooms in the United States. You know, that's a fine goal, but that is a different art village, right, than being in fine art galleries. Another could be to participate in street art fairs. I knew a fabulous artist who lives not far away from here, who had a remarkable career and in the 1980s was making $250,000, $300,000 a year selling his art in street fairs. And he says, I want more respect. So he went and got a graduate degree. And for the next 20 years, I don't think he made $100,000 by selling his art in those upper-end art galleries. But you know, he had that going on. Now he's got 4 or 5 galleries and is showing around the world and he's back at that same kind of strata. But it needs to be an extension of what it is you as an individual want to do. You need to have the courage of your conviction. You need to touch yourself, your soul, your gut, your heart. And you need to come from that and be willing to put it out there. That means you need to be vulnerable. The banker we alluded to who puts on their 3-piece suit and goes to be the teller at the bank doesn't need to be vulnerable. And they get to go home at the end of the day and put their sweatsuit on or whatever and sit in front of the television and do what they want because their work is done for the day. You as a visual artist, probably your work never finishes. You are never done for the day. You know, there's always more. We may put off some of today's work till tomorrow, but you're not done. You're an artist all the time. And you need to be vulnerable. You need to be willing to say, I can see that fragility so that somebody can relate to it. You know, you want to do as an individual what resonates with you. But what you also want to do is get others to see what you're doing and have it resonate with them. I have learned a lot by doing my course, you know, and asking these people's loaded questions. One of the things that I realize that I see a lot is that the more vulnerable an artist is, the more it gives the audience the opportunity to get in touch with their own vulnerability. If you are really vulnerable, most people don't look at your art and go, they see the vulnerability, but they don't look at your art and go, oh, I feel so sorry for her. They instead say, she touches me and it brings out the pathos in myself. And I love what that person is doing. You know, so that the expression of all that sentiment, the feeling, what resonates, can be your vision. But it's also a hell of a strategy because people relate to it and they get in touch with it and they see it and they respond to it and it brings out something in them and they have a dialogue between themselves and the work of art and they become a better person. And you've enabled that. But you've enabled that by being vulnerable. I guess the point that I'm making about the vulnerability is that by being vulnerable, you're enabling others to grow more than you're revealing yourself. It feels really difficult to be vulnerable, but people aren't necessarily looking at you and going, oh, I see all your bandages. What they say instead is, I see myself. Somebody once said to me, if I could just get past the next obstacle, I would be a success. And I went, wait a minute. There aren't any obstacles. You know, and there really are not in our country, in our culture, except one. And that's the obstacles we put in our own way. I know I do it, to me. And I bet all of you know you do it to you. This ultimately is the biggest challenge. You know, to an extent, this course I teach, Klein Artist Works, is about enabling artists to be more powerful. But in a bigger picture, it's just life coaching using an art vocabulary. And I think you would say the same kinds of things to somebody else, you know? I mean, it is so much easier for me to sit here and give you advice than it is for me to follow the stuff that I'm saying. You know, it is much easier, which makes it more fun for me to be able to do that. But, you know, I try to follow that advice, and I try to bust through my own obstacles, or sometimes get more zen, you know, and flow around those obstacles and come up with other things. But you know, if to succeed, you need to at least confront your obstacles. You need to know what's in your way. And then you need to ask yourself, is it worth my getting over this BS that I'm putting in my own way to get where I want to go? For example, an obstacle could be, Jesus, I'm terminally shy. I can't talk about my art. You know, if you believe in your art, you have an obligation to it. If you believe in your art, you need to get it out into the world, and you damn well better not get in the way of your own art. You know, a lot of these things, some of these things, I relate to being a parent and children. You know, if you're shy, you're still going to take your kid to school. You're still going to get them out the door. You're still going to hold their hand. Your art is like your child. You want to nurture it. You want to see the best things in the world happen for your art and your children. You know, you don't want to hold it back. And you don't necessarily want, you know, I mean, I'm going to flip this a bit, you know, in terms of, you know, young artists having to deal with insufficient parental support for an artistic vision. You need to have the courage of your conviction. I've said that before. You need to do what resonates for you. Mom, Dad, I would really love to be a lawyer in another life. In this life, I need to be an artist. This is my calling. This is what I got to do. This is what I want to do. This is what I can't help myself. I mean, I really want to listen to you, but it's not me. I need to be this artist person. You know, and you need to be able to say that and mean it. You know, if you don't mean it, maybe you should go be the lawyer or the other thing that your parents have in mind. You know, and some parents are capable of supporting their, you know, their artist child. But it's a challenge because so frequently artists feel like that if they're making money, they've copped out. If they're succeeding, they're cheating. You know, if they're doing smart business things, they're not doing smart arty things. You got to get over that. And society is getting better and better at enabling and appreciating artists. And it hasn't always been that way, but you need to stand up for yourself and say, I am proud of this. This is what I want to do. I think that there are 3 criteria for being a successful artist. And unfortunately, I think they're in this order. Number 1, let's go to number 3. Number 3, make good art. I don't think making good art is the most important thing. I think the most important thing is being distinctive. Make art, see, this is where it goes back again to us all being unique. You know, so you need to make art that is distinctive. It is different than anybody else's art. It is yours. And it comes from within, your soul, your gut, your heart, okay? But it needs to be distinctive. If it looks like, you know, and you don't want to be following trends. By the time you identify a trend and start following it, it's gone and you've missed the train. It doesn't work anyway. You need to be who you are. And you need to make distinctive art. If your art is too generic, too homogenized, too similar to everybody else, you're not going to cut it. Now, some of this is because you want people to be able to identify with your vision. If you know, I mean, there are artists all of us can think of, and you look at their work and you go, I know who that is. You know, but if you look at somebody else and you know, that looks like a generic seascape and I don't know who it is, you know, you're not having a connection with that artist. You may have a connection with the artwork, but not the artist. I resist, and I'm going to use the word branding. You know, your art becomes your brand. And no more than, you know, I don't know, pick a soap company. No more does or a shampoo. No more, I mean, the shampoo may wash equally well as some other shampoo, but they want to come across as there's something distinctive about that. Same thing with your art. You want to have it be distinguished from what other artists' work. Number 2, the second most important thing is you've got to get engaged. You've got to get out of the studio. You've got to get out into the world. You need to grow your community. Really important. I calculate that with 50% of your time, plus or minus 20%, should be spent outside the studio. That means 30 to 70% of your time should be spent working on your career. And 30 to 70% should be spent working on your art. Now, working on your career means getting your art out into the world, doing what you need to do so that your art can take care of you and you can take care of it. You need to grow your community. I use that phrase much more than I talk about networking. I think networking is handing somebody your business card and saying, what can you do for me? I think growing your community is creating an environment where people can do something for one another, and where it's kind of like investing in good karma. I didn't know that Nick Precup was going to be here this afternoon. I didn't know that I would walk in the door at the hotel and see Nick. But he and I have a relationship, and we've grown this community that we're involved in together, and as a result of that, he introduced me. I coached TED Fellows, and Nick said, tell me more about that. And I told him a little about it. He said, oh, I might like to do that. Can you make an introduction for me? I said, sure, I'd love to. They need more coaches and mentors. Now, this is the thing. You realize that if somebody likes you, they are more willing to do you a favor. If you like somebody, you're more willing to do them a favor. It's about the relationships. If you want to have an art gallery show your work, this then to me goes back to dating. All of you guys who are under 25, has somebody ever walked up and said to you, whoa, you're cute, let's get married? It isn't really work that way. Or, like, whoa, you're hot, do me. It doesn't work that way. Some people say that, but, I suspect that isn't the best strategy. It's much more about, I like your eyes. Bye. Oh, you have nice hair too. See you again. If you want a relationship with an art gallery, I think the strategy is to go to the gallery at an opening, probably, because you're sure, or a museum, because at the museum, at the opening, you're sure to encounter the curator who did the show, or at the opening of the gallery exhibition, you're sure to encounter the art dealer that's there, and all you need to say is, and you need to say it with belief, you need to believe it, nice show, thank you. That's it. That's all you need to say. It's like dating. You don't have to say, maybe we could get together tonight if we have coffee first, but, will you look at can I hand you here's my disc, here's my images. That's not the way to start. And you want to compliment them, And then you go back a month later for the next exhibit, and hopefully you like that, and you say, nice show, thank you. And then maybe you go back a month later, and it's not during the opening of the exhibition. The objective is to have the art dealer say to you, I remember you. You've liked a couple of my shows here. Thank you. What do you do? They already know you're an artist. That they can tell. But when they say, what do? You say, I paint, I sculpt, I make digital stuff. I'm into robotics. And then they go, really? What's it look like? That's how a relationship grows. That is so much superior to walking into a gallery and going, here are my images, are you interested? You need to grow the community, and you need to be willing to do something for somebody else. You need to be a good human. And it's how those relationships grow and develop. The third thing you have to do is to make good art. And make it as an extension of your soul, and do what resonates for you. We can talk about different kinds of strategies. I figure that 90% of art we look at that's made by visual artists is between 18 by 24 inches and 4 by 5 feet. If all art fits into, between here and there, are we better off making things that are this big or really big? And then instead of having 90,000 people who are dealing with that 90%, maybe we only have, we have more people that are interested in the odd thing that we're doing. I think it's really important as a visual artist. I think that by definition of visual art, any artist is creative. I think we can accept that. And there comes that term creatives, which I kind of like. But so often, creative people are only creative with their artwork. And I want you to be creative with your career. You know, I mean, I interview all these experts and things, and I talk to curators, and I say, do you ever go to shows that aren't at art galleries? And they say, yeah. And I say, do you ever go to exhibits that are, you know, by artists who've never shown before? And they go, yeah. And I say, well, why? Or how? Or what gets you out the door to get there? And they say, well, frequently it's some sense that I'm going to see something I've never seen before. Or I'm going to go to a place that has some different kind of energy or something that's going on that I've never encountered before. Or there's some sense of spectacle that I might not want to miss. You know, or I'm going to encounter quality. Or, I mean, I used to have an art gallery, and I would get announcements. I mean, I have gone to exhibits that have been in beauty parlors. I have gone into exhibits that have been in graphic design firms. I think it's really important as a visual artist to understand what goes into creating an exhibit. I think it's a brilliant idea for young artists like you guys to, in the first 18 months of trying to get exposure exhibitions for your art, to create your own exhibitions. Get together with 3, 4, 5 friends and do a group show. You know, there are plenty of businesses, unfortunately, in mid-America that have gone out of business, and there are vacant storefronts, and a landlord might very well give you the space for a couple of weeks. Or you can go to a church, a beauty parlor, a law firm, and say, we'd like to do an exhibit here, and do the exhibit, install the art on Friday, have a reception Friday night, have it open to the public on Saturday, take it down on Sunday. That counts. You know, send it out to the email list. You learn how high to hang your art. You learn how to light the art. You learn how to do a price list and what to do with wall labels. You learn whether to put your art contiguously all together or to intersperse it with somebody else's art. You learn how to cooperate with other artists. And I think it's a really good strategy to learn how to get, you know, to grow your mailing list, which is how you grow your community. And I think it's okay to share the mailing list with the other artists in the show. And if, you know, and everybody's sharing this stuff, and you raise the level of the pond together. I'm a big advocate of growing community. We've spoken mostly about the individual as the visual artist. And we mentioned for a moment the idea that there are lots of art villages. There's a changing paradigm. And that is the notion of artists having, well, first of all, my notion was that I'd gotten picked up was artists having a business partner. Nothing is impossible for the person who has somebody else to do it for them. You know, a business partner should have, I would think, a 49% interest in your career. And you have the 51% interest in your career in terms of how the two of you divvy that up. And they can suggest things to you. This isn't an assistant. This is someone whose voice you need to listen to, as opposed to someone who you tell what to do. And you strategize together. You know, as an extension of that, I'm working with the notion in developing this of artists having an advisory board. And you can have two different kinds of an advisory board. One advisory board would be for services that you need. You could have a caterer on your advisory board. You could have a public relations person on your advisory board. You can have your accountant on your advisory board, etc. Okay? The second board would be people pay money, and they're on your advisory board for a finite period of time, maybe a year, maybe 2 years. And maybe they're paying you, it depends. The notion is that this is not a write-off, and you're not a charity, though that can be set up if you need to with different kind of agencies that'll launder the money for you legally. The New York Foundation for the Arts does that. There are a couple of entities. But the idea is that you as an artist are special. And there are people who want to see what it is you do. Sort of like, I'm blanking. It's not Alice in the Yellow Brick Road. What is that? The Wizard of Oz and the guy behind behind the curtain. You know, they want to get behind your curtain and see what it is to be a creative person. And they want to come by your studio maybe an hour a month and take a look and they want to feel like they can contribute to your success. And they can do that by giving you money on an annual or a monthly basis, and then they can come in and take a look. I know of about 200 artists that are now doing this, you know, and getting people to be on an advisory board that are paying them amount of money annually. You know, a lot of the paradigm is changing. I mean, there are a lot of artists who are doing really big projects, huge projects where things are not saleable, you know. Don't rule that out. You know, doing huge installations, doing earthworks, and large commissions, and or big murals, and or changing society. You know, and that takes some kind of independent funding. There are lots and lots of ways to be involved in the art world. You know, those different kinds of art villages. Chuck Close is a brilliant artist. I'm going to wrap it up here. You know, so many people look for inspiration and wait for it to happen. Chuck Close says, inspiration is for amateurs. The rest of us just show up and get to work. Thank you.